The image that survived the war is simple and powerful. A United States Marine in a damp jungle clearing, canvas leggings dark with mud, a 12-gauge pump shotgun in his hands. A weapon that looks more at home in a duck blind than on a battlefield. A Japanese patrol pushes through the undergrowth, expecting rifles, maybe a machine gun. Instead, at ranges measured in a few paces, the first thing they see is a muzzle flash and a wall of buckshot. That picture is so vivid that, over time, it became something more than memory. It became myth. The myth said that Japanese infantry never expected American shotguns, and that these short, brutal weapons tore through banzai charges and jungle infiltrations, turning spiritual courage into shredded uniforms and broken bodies. But the records tell a quieter story. In the Pacific, from 1942 to 1945, the jungle did something unusual to modern war. It shrank it. On small islands, Guadalcanal, New Guinea, the Solomons, visibility often dropped to 30 yards or less. Trees, vines, Kenai grass, ravines, all of it compressed engagements to the scale of a narrow hallway. On paper, this was the perfect habitat for the shotgun. It was not an accidental weapon. The Winchester Model 1897 was John Browning's work, refined over nearly half a century. The trench gun version carried by Marines had a 20-inch barrel, a perforated heat shield to keep hands off hot steel, and a bayonet lug that accepted the long M1917 sword bayonet. Most important of all, it lacked a trigger disconnector. Hold the trigger down, slam the pump as fast as the arm would move, and the gun would fire every time the action closed. In the black of a jungle night, a Marine could send 6 loads of triple-aught buckshot into the dark in roughly 2 seconds. Each shell carried 9 pellets of .33 caliber lead, about 8.38 millimeters across and 50-odd grains each. At 10 yards, the pattern spread to about 10 inches. At 20 yards, 20 inches. At 30 yards, 30. In country where a man sometimes could not see his own squad leader clearly, that pattern was a form of insurance. Perfect aim was no longer required. The Winchester Model 1912, later simply called the Model 12, took the same idea and made it smoother. Designed by T.C. Johnson, it hid the hammer inside the receiver and reduced the chance of accidental discharge. By 1943, it was replacing the old Model 97 in many Marine units, but both guns served until the end. The Americans did not treat these as improvised tools. They standardized them. On September 21, 1942, the Army published Technical Manual TM 9285. It laid out in dry, careful language how to carry, maintain, and fight with the Model 97, the Model 12, the Remington Model 11, the Stevens 520 and 620, and the Ithaca 37. Marines trained with them at Camp Pendleton in California, at Camp Lejeune in North Carolina, and at Parris Island in South Carolina. They learned to shoot in the woods. They rehearsed night defense, jungle ambush, cave and bunker clearing, prisoner handling. They learned slam fire, but were warned not to lean on it too heavily, because barrels overheated and ammunition disappeared fast. On paper, the shotgun was part of the structure of a Marine division. Table of Organization E100, effective from 1943, authorized 306 shotguns in each division. In theory, that meant shotguns in military police companies, pioneer battalions, and scattered through rifle units for special tasks. An American industry delivered. Winchester alone turned out roughly 25,000 Model 97s for the war, and somewhere between 60,000 and 80,000 Model 12s. Remington, Stevens, and Ithaca added thousands more. The nation had the steel, the machine tools, and the labor to do it. Abundance, not ideology, won the war. Across the ocean, the Imperial Japanese Army built its war on very different assumptions. For decades before the Pacific conflict, Japanese officers studied the rifles of Britain, the machine guns of America, the mortars of France, and the submachine guns of the Soviet Union. Their manuals dissected foreign weapons in careful detail. But the shotgun hardly appeared at all. In the Japanese mind, it was a hunter's tool, useful for birds and small game, not a serious weapon of war. More importantly, their doctrine centered on something that could not be measured in calibers or muzzle. Velocity, spiritual power. Industrial reality forced that choice. Japan produced less steel in a year than the United States produced in a month. Heavy industry, machine tools, oil, buy every material. Metric, the island empire trailed far behind. Its answer was to make each infantryman a sort of precision weapon, superior in close combat to any foreign soldier. Training hammered home night. Infiltration, silent movement, and the cold thrust of the bayonet. The standard script went like this: approach under cover of darkness, slip through the gaps in the enemy line, then strike it close. Range with grenades, rifle fire, and steel. These tactics had worked in China. They had worked against British units in Malaya and against American troops in the Philippines. They were designed for the exact short ranges where the shotgun was at its most lethal. Faith, the doctrine said, would armor the soldier where steel could not. Faith cannot armor steel, but it can send a man forward into places where most would hesitate to go. When that doctrine met American firepower on the Tenru, Alligator Creek, as most Americans called it, on Guadalcanal in August of 1942, the cost was catastrophic. Colonel Kayaneo Ichiki's detachment of 917 men attacked in the night and were virtually destroyed. 789 Japanese soldiers died there. And yet, in the official reports, the weapons that did the most killing were not shotguns. They were Browning water-cooled machine guns, the M1917, firing steady streams of 30 caliber bullets and 37mm anti-tank guns loaded with canister, each round turning the barrel into a giant shotgun of its own. Shotguns appear in the record only in passing, mentioned around perimeter lines and patrols. There is a reason for that. The Pacific did not just shrink combat ranges. It soaked them. Early in the war, most shotgun ammunition still used paper hulls, just like commercial hunting loads. In the 100% humidity of the islands, those paper tubes swelled. Shells that slid smoothly into a chamber in California refused to seat after a day in the jungle. Marines told stories of shells swelling so badly they had to be hammered into chambers with knife handles, something no one could do under fire. That problem followed the shotgun, from island to island. On Guadalcanal, it was irritating and dangerous. In the highlands and rivers of New Guinea, with constant rain and soaking river crossings, it was crippling. Army divisions that had asked specifically for shotguns, inspired by early Marine reports, often ended up leaving them in rear areas, relying instead on M1 Garand's, Thompson submachine guns, and Browning automatic rifles. On March 29, 1945, the Army finally adopted a full brass 12-gauge buckshot shell, the M19, officially designated shell, shotgun, brass, 12-gauge. Numbered double-aught buck. The brass case did not swell. At last, the ammunition matched the environment. But by then, the largest and bloodiest battles of the Pacific Ground Campaign were almost over. On Iwo Jima, 3 Marine divisions went ashore with authorization for 918 shotguns among them. On paper, that was a formidable pool of close-range firepower. In practice, the island's black volcanic ash, the honeycomb of tunnels, and the deeply buried bunkers favored something else entirely. The flamethrower and the demolition charge ruled that battlefield. Specialized flame tanks hosed cave mouths with burning fuel at ranges far beyond any shotgun's reach. Of the 26,000 American casualties there, no existing record links a single loss to a failure of shotgun tactics. On Okinawa, with the 1st and 6th Marine Divisions carrying more than 600 shotguns and now supplied with brass shells, the pattern repeated. The Japanese 32nd Army fought from layered defensive lines, using ridges and fortified cave systems in a depth that kept American infantry at extended ranges. This was artillery and tank country, not shotgun country. Shotguns found work at the margins, clearing the last few survivors from positions already smashed by other weapons, or in the hands of military police managing civilians, but they did not shape the overall battle. The silence in the Japanese record is telling. In the First World War, when American troops brought shotguns to the trenches of France, the German government protested formally in September of 1918, claiming that the weapons caused unnecessary suffering and violated the Hague Convention. They threatened to execute any Americans captured with them. No such protests came from Tokyo in the next war. Captured Japanese documents discuss American firepower in general: machine guns, naval gunfire, artillery, tanks. Flamethrowers. They lay out countermeasures: overhead cover against mortars, spider holes against tanks, reverse slope defenses against naval bombardment. They devote entire sections to dealing with flamethrowers. Shotguns hardly appear at all. Post-war interrogations of Japanese officers follow the same pattern. They talk at length about American material superiority, combined arms tactics, the terror of flame, the relentless pressure of air and sea power. They do not describe shotgun pellets cutting down charges or forcing doctrinal change. The absence is its own kind of evidence. On the American side, the oral record is not much louder. The Library of Congress Veterans History Project holds thousands of interviews from men who fought in the Pacific. The National Museum of the Pacific War preserves more than 4,000 oral histories. In those voices, flamethrowers and machine guns appear again and again. So do rifles, grenades, mortars. Shotguns do not. Eugene Sledge, in With the Old Breed, wrote one of the clearest accounts of Polilliu and Okinawa and never mentioned shotguns, even though he served in a rifle company that would have had access to them. Robert Leckie, in Helmet for My Pillow, wrote about the 1st Marine Division on Guadalcanal and beyond, and also passed over the shotgun in silence. The veterans who did carry them tended to describe them in modest terms. A Marine from Guadalcanal remembered taking a Model 97 on patrol, good for night watch and narrow jungle paths, he said, but useless past short range. When the shooting opened up, he wanted a rifle. Another Marine recalled that each squad was supposed to have a shotgun, but half the time it stayed with the company gear, too specialized for everyday use. The paperwork supports that memory. Armorers' logs from Marine divisions in the Pacific are full of repairs to rifles and machine guns, barrels worn, springs broken, extractors chipped. From constant use, shotgun repair requests are rare and often involve cleaning off storage rust rather than replacing parts worn out in battle. Ammunition requisitions tell a similar story. Millions of rifle rounds, hundreds of thousands of machine gun cartridges and mortar shells, but relatively modest orders for buckshot, much of it clearly tagged for training. Even logistics worked. Against the combat shotgun, each 12-gauge shell weighed roughly twice as much as a single rifle cartridge and took up roughly 3 times the space. A Marine could carry 80 rifle rounds in, the weight and volume of 36 shotgun shells. Supply officers, staring at the limited cargo space of landing craft and supply ships, prioritized the ammunition that could be used in most situations: rifle, machine gun, mortar, over specialized loads for a niche weapon. In city fighting, where theory suggested the shotgun might finally shine, the war took a different turn. In Manila and Naha, Japanese defenders created layered kill zones, booby-trapped approaches, and barricaded firing positions. These tactics kept American troops at distances where grenades, Thompsons, and flamethrowers made more sense than a 6-round shotgun with a limited effective range. Other nations' choices put the American experience in context. British and Australian units fought in the same kind of jungle and seldom used combat shotguns. The Soviets, in urban hellscapes like Stalingrad and vast open fields like Kursk, never adopted them in significant numbers. Chinese forces battling Japanese infantry at close quarters for years did not field shotguns as standard weapons. Their absence from those arsenals suggests that while the shotgun had clear theoretical strengths, it was never indispensable. The story did not end with the surrender in Tokyo Bay. After the war, American boards studied which weapons had earned their place. Rifles, machine guns, mortars, recoilless rifles, and later automatic rifles received investment and development. Shotguns were retained, but as tools for specific jobs: guard duty, police work, later door breaching, and less lethal ammunition. In Korea, Marines and soldiers once again carried mostly rifles and automatic weapons on patrol. In Vietnam, the shotgun returned to the jungle in greater numbers, particularly in the hands of point men and tunnel rats. But even there it remained a specialist's weapon, not the backbone of infantry firepower. And yet, in the wider culture, the shotgun's shadow grew larger than its wartime footprint. Hollywood liked the simple, recognizable shape. A Marine racking a pump gun in a dark bunker tells a clear visual story even before a Word of dialogue is spoken. Later video games and popular histories extended that image. Americans with trench guns sweeping through palm-fringed clearings, Japanese soldiers cut down at a few yards by blasts of buckshot. They did not just lose a battle, they lost their idea of the world. In that version of the story, the shotgun becomes a symbol of American pragmatism, a hunting gun dragged into a modern war, in defiance of old European notions of what a proper military weapon should be. It becomes proof of cleverness, of improvisation, of supposedly unmatched close-range lethality. But the verified record, the manuals, the tables of organization, the supply logs, and the veterans' own words paint a more modest picture. Shotguns were present in Marine units across the Pacific. They were trained with seriously, assigned deliberately, and used effectively in certain narrow roles. Point security on patrol, perimeter defense against infiltrators, guarding prisoners and supply routes. They were also hamstrung for most of the war by unreliable paper-cased ammunition, by the weight and bulk of their shells, by the difficulty of reaching shotgun ranges in battles. Dominated by artillery, tanks, flamethrowers, and air power, Japanese infantry truly did not expect to meet them. But that surprise rarely changed the course of a fight. The weapons that actually broke Japanese doctrine were heavier and colder. Naval guns that shattered cave mouths from miles offshore, high-explosive shells that collapsed spider holes, tanks that shrugged off small arms fire, and burned defenders out of pillboxes, and the relentless pressure of a logistics system that could keep those weapons fed month after month. Abundance, not ideology, won the war. And abundance favored the weapons that fit into the broader system of combined arms. The Garand in the rifleman's hands, the bar on the squad's flank, the machine gun on the ridge, the mortar behind the line, the flamethrower and demolition charge at the bunker's mouth. The combat shotgun, for all its theoretical ferocity at 15 yards, never truly joined that league. What remains, then, is a double lesson. On one level, it is a reminder that technical capability does not guarantee tactical impact. A weapon can be devastating in a narrow set of conditions and yet be marginalized by environment, logistics, and doctrine. On another, it shows how stories about war grow in the telling, how a few vivid moments and a striking image can swell into legend until the legend overshadows the quieter, more complicated truth. The men who shouldered those trench guns in the dark earned respect for the jobs they did. Their tools worked when the conditions were right. But the Pacific War was decided by forces far larger than a handful of pump-action shotguns, and the Japanese Army's failure to anticipate them was less a fatal blind spot than a small, almost irrelevant gap in a much larger struggle over steel, oil, distance, and time. The blast of buckshot in the jungle made a terrible sound. The roar that ended the war came from the engines of ships, tanks, bombers, and factories an ocean away.